In the search for the number 3 quarterback in this 2015 NFL draft, many have turned to Brett Hundley out of UCLA. Some, like myself, have turned to Garrett Grayson out of Colorado State. Yet others have turned to Bryce Petty, the quarterback from Baylor. Now, here's a guy that has some questions about his game, but he also has some of those traits that make people believe, especially a lot of fans, it seems, that he is the one that is most well equipped after Winston and Mariota to be a long-term NFL starting quarterback, a highly productive player coming from Art Briles' system at Baylor. This is a guy that put up some very nice numbers over the past couple of years, led a very fast-tempoed, high-powered Baylor Bears offense, and a lot of people see what he did at college and assume that it can translate to the NFL level. Well, the question is, will it? Is he just merely a product of the system, or is there more to the story here? And could Bryce Petty end up being a long-term NFL starting quarterback? Now, in film, there's a lot to Bryce Petty's game that I actually really like. First, I see a guy with the size and build necessary to hold up to the physicality of the NFL level. He's not 6'5", 6'6", mind you, but he's tall enough at about 6'3", and he has enough bulk on him to be able to hold up to the rigors of a 16-game NFL season in terms of his body. What I really like about his game, though, is his arm strength. He easily has the arm strength to make all the required NFL throws, and I would argue in terms of the big-name prospects at the position in the 2015 NFL draft, he has the best arm. I most certainly think he has a stronger arm than both Mariota and Winston, and quite possibly by a good margin. Another thing I really like about Bryce Petty's game is that he's not just a statuesque passer in the pocket. He is a guy that can move. He's a guy that can move both within the pocket and as a scrambler. This is also a guy that can throw on the move. In particular, he's established to me that he can throw on the move to his right very comfortably. I don't know so much about throwing on the move to the left, but he can at least move out of the pocket to the right and be a threat to throw as much as he would be to run, but he can also gain some yards with this feet. He's never going to be a big-time scrambler at the NFL level, but he's a guy that can get it done when you need to. I also like the fact that Bryce Petty hangs tough in the pocket. You know, oftentimes you'll see prospects where they seem to cower in the face of a pass rush, and that's something I could never say about Bryce Petty's game. Here's a guy that stands tall. I think he's a tough leader. He's got a very nice quick release. There are a lot of things about Bryce Petty on film that jump out to you, and it makes me understand why some people envision him as a starting quarterback at the NFL level and maybe a guy that is a bit underrated. However, with all the good stuff being said, there are some things that also really jump out to me on film about Bryce Petty's game that give me some concern and some real pause about whether or not he can actually be a long-term starter at the NFL level. A lot of what goes on with Bryce Petty that I don't like is from a mechanical standpoint. He's a guy whose accuracy is very inconsistent. His deep balls tend to sail, and a lot of that is due to the utilization or the lack of utilization of his lower body in his throwing mechanics. He's a guy that far too often falls away from his throws, far too often doesn't step into his throws, far too often, even though he has a quick release, he's a very armsy thrower, which can lead to either one of two things. You're falling away from a throw and you throw a low whir burner, or you could be trying to throw the ball over the middle and as a result the ball sails on you, and that could be very dangerous at the NFL level. And I think his accuracy at times really suffered in direct result of the fact that he didn't consistently set his feet in the pocket. What also concerns me a little bit about Bryce Petty is the system that he played in at Baylor. It is very much a one read and throw or run system. It's not something where it's designed for the quarterback to go through multiple progressions on a consistent basis. I saw Bryce Petty a lot be a guy that locked onto his primary target, not looking off the safety, not giving the defense a lot to consider. Basically, once you figured out where Bryce Petty was looking, more often than not, that's exactly where the ball was going. And playing in that spread, he lacks a lot of experience under center. If it's going to be a knock against Mariota, it most certainly needs to be a knock against Bryce Petty. And the type of tempo system that they ran, you know, similar to Mariota, similar to what Chip Kelly runs with the Philadelphia Eagles, is something that Bryce Petty ran very well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he can run it very well at the NFL level. That tendency to lock onto the primary target, combined with the fact that his accuracy is very inconsistent because of his poor utilization of his lower body and his footwork in his throwing mechanics, leaves me to have some very grave, serious concerns about his abilities to project as a starter at the next level. When looking for an NFL comparison for Bryce Petty to try and project what he could potentially be at the NFL level, it's hard for me to come up with a 100% perfect comparison like I had maybe in my mind with Marcus Mariota to Ryan Tannehill of the Miami Dolphins. But the closest comparison I could come up with for Bryce Petty was Jay Cutler. Now, look, I personally believe Bryce Petty is a much better leader, a much better personality to have on the field in your huddle and in your locker room, most importantly, compared to a Jay Cutler. I think Bryce Petty has more of the intangibles than a Jay Cutler does to have the ability to be a leader of a franchise and be an NFL starting quarterback. But from a physical standpoint, while Petty's not quite as tall or big as a Jay Cutler, there are a lot of similarities in their game as a passer. Bryce Petty is a better athlete than a lot of people give him credit for, just like Jay Cutler. Bryce Petty has a very strong arm, something I don't think he's frankly given enough credit for, and we most certainly know that Jay Cutler has a hose when it's unleashed. But we also know with Jay Cutler that two of his biggest bugaboos over the years have been his tendency to lock onto his primary target and stare down his number one receiver without going through his progressions, without throwing the safety or the zone coverage underneath off, something that Bryce Petty struggled with a lot the last 2 years at Baylor. And Jay Cutler still, after almost a decade in the league, struggles with his mechanics on a consistent basis, doesn't consistently step through his throws. He tends to get very armsy with his throws, and as a result, his accuracy can suffer at times. He could throw some worm burners, but most importantly of all, what can really scare you with Cutler sometimes is his ability to float the balls over the middle. And those are the same type of traits and characteristics that Bryce Petty has. Now, a lot of people may sit there and look at a Bryce Petty and say, things like mechanics, those can be worked on. Those are very easy to fix. It can be, but that's not always the case. When a guy gets to this point in time and he's that type of player and exhibits those types of traits, both positive and not so positive, they've been doing these for years. It's hard to break those old habits, and there's no guarantee that if you work on those things, which need to be worked on with Bryce Petty, that it's necessarily going to translate into guaranteed NFL starting quarterback success. And when I look at Bryce Petty too, he has some concussion concerns. I look at him as a guy that could struggle a lot with the little nicks and bumps and nagging injuries, the kind of oddball stuff, the fluke type of stuff, even though he's a big guy that could physically stand up to the pounding, just like a Jay Cutler at the NFL level, a guy that looks like he has the size and the strength and the build to be able to withstand the pounding of the NFL season, but more often than not can't finish a 16-game season. That's another concern I have for Bryce Petty. When I look at Petty, he's a guy that was a very, very good college quarterback. I have some concerns about whether or not he could ever really be an NFL starter. In some cases on film, he kind of looked a little bit like Brandon Weeden to me, but I gave him a little bit more credit than that. And yeah, calling him Jay Cutler is at least a little bit more credit than that. But he's a guy that I am concerned might have been a little bit of a product of the system. I'm always a big believer in accuracy, and in particular, the ability to use your eyes. And those are two big things that Bryce Petty was significantly lacking on at the college level. Now, maybe he could get in the right system, work with the right coach, take a year or two to develop him, and maybe he could do a little something. But at this point in time, I view Bryce Petty as, in my money, the number 5 prospect in this 2015 NFL draft at the quarterback position, and worth nothing more than a 4th-round pick, if even that.